Satellite Gallery. The Satellite Gallery is an experimental gallery
Hi everybody, just to let you know we're going to get going. Thanks.
That's partnered with the Belkin, MOA, Presentation House, and the Charles H. Scott Gallery. Today we're part of the Downtown Gallery Tours with the Dame and the Contemporary Art Gallery, which will be next at 3 p.m. at 555 Nelson Street. Today our show is the Mainstreeters Taking Advantage, 1972 to 1982. It's about an art gang that met at Charles Tupper and started creating art together. Today, leading the tour will be Michael and Allison.
Can you speak up?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You really have to shout. I can't hear you.
Allison is a writer and curator that's done work with Vivo and the Ore Gallery, as well as publishing written works across Canada. And Michael is a curator and writer as well, who's done work with ArtSpeak and the Belkin, and published reviews in magazines such as Canadian Art and Art on Paper. And here's Michael now.
Thanks, Michaela.
Thank you, Michaela.
And thanks everybody for coming. Oh my gosh. I'm just going to start us off by letting you know that because of the limited amount of time, it's about a 20-odd minute tour. We'll walk through the show and introduce all the concepts and everything, and then we'll give you that sort of 15-20 minutes to look at the work. And for those of you who are continuing on to the CAG, Amy will kind of come around, let you know when they're getting going. It'll be about 2:40, and then we'll reconvene in the larger room for those who are staying, and we'll just have a little bit of a continued discussion. So just to let you know, there'll be a bit of a break in between where you can look at some of the works. And from there, so we'll kind of be going through the show in a kind of clockwise manner. We're going to start in here. And Michael's going to begin a little bit just by talking about this piece here, which only some of you can see, but you'll see it's here on the monitor. It's called 4, and a little bit about its placement in the show.
Okay, thanks, Allison. I'd just like to say that this project was initiated as a research project by the Grunt Gallery a year and a half ago, Glenn Eltine, who had a title called Taking Advantage. And we didn't quite know what that meant, that subtitle, as it became, until we got in the midst of the research that we were doing, much of which was at the studio of Paul Wong in his archive, as well, after a while, the archives of the other members of the Mainstreeters group, whose names are listed over there. This is a project that the exhibition element is a co-presentation between the Grunt and Presentation House Gallery, who, as Michaela mentioned, are one of the 4 partners in the Satellite Gallery. Allison mentioned 4. Now, 4 is the first thing you see as you come in and turn to your right. It is a discrete work. It was made after the Tour de 4, which was a project that Paul did with Jeanette Reinhardt, Deb Fong, Carol Hackett, and Anastasia McDonald. And they went all over Canada into the northeastern United States and back, and when they came back, they took what in effect was research based on their performances and documentation and experiences, and wrote a script that became this video called 4. So not a video taken on tour, as is often the case, but a video that was made after the tour. So this reversal is something that does play out a lot in the way the Mainstreeters made work. It's part of their methodology. We took something of a reversal from this work in the way we announce the exhibition as you come to it. So over here is the traditional area for the title of an exhibition. This area was designed by Robert Klein, and this was given pride of place as a place to tell you where you are, what you're going to get when you come to this an exhibition at the Satellite Gallery. So rather than put the titling Mainstreeters Taking Advantage and the list of artists and acknowledgments to our patrons and donors in there, we decided to put something of the genesis story of the Mainstreeters in there. And this genesis story is one based not on a specific time and place per se, but one that's built on the accretion of the relationships, which are so essential to the Mainstreeters. The relationships they formed among each other and how they manifested in terms of locus and place and where they lived. So we have a genesis story there. It's out of a chronology, or it's not in linear time, and it's reversed from where you'd normally find it. We put the titling over there. And it's a way of leading into this piece here, which is a result of much of our research, which we found in boxes and scanned. These includes photographs, notes. Notes were very
I'm going to take on one,
okay,
just jump in for 1 second.
Feel free, yeah.
Just because I want to back us up before we get to that point where we describe our research, just to say a few words about the Mainstreeters and who they were. So the Mainstreeters, as you'll see the list of names, were a group of young artists who came together in and out of high school. So basically met and lived along Main Street and sort of dubbed themselves the Mainstreeters as a way just of identifying as being members of the community. And we really came to this project through the kind of memory of them, or the sort of legacy that they left behind, their reputation, the notorious reputation, in fact, of the Mainstreeters. And so what you're seeing in this room and our choices in this exhibition as we explain them and describe them are the ways in which Michael and I grappled with that history and sort of looking back upon a group of people as much as a series of artworks. So when we start to talk about that choice to forefront the text from 4, that's sort of the beginning of the video 4 that also comes out of some of the other works that they're doing, leading into this room with all the documentation on the wall here, all this sort of reproduced photographs. It's really in that spirit of thinking about them as both an entity, a group of people, and as a group of artists making work. So that, I think, is really important to put at the forefront before we leap into this bit about how long, and how much, and how interesting, in fact, it was to just spend time wending through the kind of documents and the leftover memories as they kind of accumulated in this sort of archive that we were given some access to. So if you want to pick it up.
Okay, yeah, indeed. The Mainstreeters identified themselves, amongst themselves, as an art gang. The gang was sort of a way, understandable way of organizing oneself, particularly in the way Vancouver was divided by Main Street between West and East. You know, there's nothing wrong with being part of a gang. So a gang was an informal social organization, which speaks a bit to the notoriety of the group. However, they were, let's say, I would say sort of autodidacts. They were people who came to things through their reading of the popular culture, popular media, the way they recognized the content, but also they found the critique that was rolling within it, and it helped to sort of build a sense of who they were and how they saw the world and how they saw more established art practices in the city. We begin right here, actually, in a way, with the first minutes of the meeting of the group, when they started to really recognize themselves as a sort of playing with the ideas of incorporation, and murder research being the first piece by which they agreed to organize themselves around as having a kind of art product or art object. Yeah.
So I'll just read this for you. Agenda: the first official meeting of the Main Street Inc. Cultural Society. Number 1, discussion of past, present, and future history. Number 2, who's in, who's out, potentials, how to discourage newcomers. Number 3, artistic skills, discipline. Number 4, first major project, murder research. Number 5, legalization. Number 6, election and appointment of society officers. And then following this, you know, the minutes. So it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek. We did play around a lot when we were thinking about this show, about the idea that they were an entity, an institution, but never incorporated, never formalized into a building, a structure that was fixed. Much like the kind of artist-run centers that were floating around them, they saw themselves as a thing. But at the same time, it's all a bit of a farce, a bit of a joke, a bit of a way of, you know, taking the piss out of all of that and making it a little bit less serious. So I think that was really important to us in the way that we understood how this came about, in sort of the way in which we might relate to it today. And that's sort of part of why this is here. Mm-hmm. And in fact, this whole wall has been a bit assembled due to our own parsing of you know, just what we could make out of some of the leftovers of really what's a personal archive of individual memories of times, which is something that is not necessarily adhering to what we would think of as, you know, a documentation of a work.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'll just give you the Mainstreeters right now. Here's Anastasia, there's Jeanette, there's Ken, there's Marlene, there's Paul, there's Carol, and there's Charlie.
And Deb down there.
I'm sorry, Deb. Deb, right there, okay. So in terms of putting this wall together, like I said earlier, this is not in any chronology, much like the introductory text, which is taken from the 4 video. So we're working more in what, towards what Allison's saying about memory and how memory, you know, cycles back. And pardon me. Moving on. Okay. But just one thing about
we knew
notes.
It was going to be like this.
I just want to say one thing about the notes. Lots of notes, lots of letters. Correspondence art was something that was around at the time. Very much like the social media today with the tweeting. Some of these notes which are added on to over time. So just and we see projects that were going on. We see informal things going on. Trips and etc. So we've got to move on, so we'll move on.
But before we move, I'm just going to explain what the rest of this room sort of fits into a certain paradigm, and then we'll move through the hallway into the larger space and reconvene there. So in this room, on the other side of the hall that you'll see is a project that is a kind of recuperation of documentation of the house of Kenneth Fletcher. So you're both seeing a tape that was taken, a footage that was taken by Paul Wong, and a roll of slide film that was taken by Paul Wong. And this is in the weeks following the death of Kenneth Fletcher. He was a central figure in the group, one of the members, dearly beloved by all, and passed away at an early age of 23. Caused a huge rift for the group. It's a big touchstone for a kind of turning point for some of the things that happened to them. And so it was very important to us to recuperate that material. And it really figures into the absence of Ken in the work that we have done. As well, you'll find in this room a wall of video documentation. So of course, we're looking back at that moment in the 70s when the video camera is in everyone's hands for the first time, and the Mainstreeters really took to this. So we felt it was important in the work that we were doing to recuperate some of the material that was left behind in video. And so much like this array that we have of photographs, the videos here relate to kind of ongoing everyday activities of the Mainstreeters, and they sort of play out. It's about an hour worth of footage, so you can kind of come back to it again as we look at the show. As we move through the hallway, you'll see more sort of ephemera, individual artworks, and small sort of bits and pieces left over from material production that people were doing during that time. So I'll encourage you to look at that as we reconvene in the other room.
Just one thing to say, like in this room, the 4 is the only discrete artwork proper. Everything else is like the projections over there, video sketchbook stuff. This is all pictures taken, things gathered. So not really artworks per se, but materials which give you an indication of the life of the Mainstreeters, which is very important to the show. So moving through now, we'll go through the hallway, as Allison said, and you'll see, for example, Ken Fletcher's interest in coffee filters and bowling pins, and how, as a young artist, he was modeling these motifs, and in the way younger artists identify with an object or form and take it to some place where it eventually goes. We see instances of Charlie Ray's painting. We see a lot of correspondence. We see a batik there that Ken Fletcher did while he was part of the Stadium Gallery, which is part of the Vancouver Art Gallery's extensions program, where a lot of the artists came to work with video property, through Michael Goldberg, meeting him there around 1970.
Okay, we're going to, just in the interest of time, we're just going to press on. So this room is a little bit differently organized. I'm going to start by talking about this video bank over here. You'll have to come back to actually view it. It's, you know, sort of, we took the tack of allowing the sort of video material to really live on a kind of technology that would have been present during its day. So you're seeing the cube monitors that you might have seen throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, different iterations of them anyway. These 3 pieces here, they sort of enter us into a new room where we're talking really about works. They're sort of The first one here directly in front of me is called Main Street Drag Ball. The drag balls were a really important activity that we came to kind of investigate, that the Mainstreeters undertook, and sort of indicates the kind of larger presence that they had in the city. So basically each year, kind of toward the end of the year, they would throw a really big drag ball, starting small, let's say, with their own apartments, inviting people. You could come, but not unless you came in drag, and you got to come and make yourself up. Sometimes there was a makeup room manned by the wonderful Marlene, among others. Really that scene became a kind of locus of some of the activity that was happening for them, a way of kind of manifesting all the energy, let's say, of the work that they were doing. So that tape gathers together material from over the period of 5 different drag balls, edited together. You see people, kind of the who's who of the art scene maybe, or among others, I suppose, dancing, having a good time. There were always trophies and activities that were kind of happening throughout the evening. It's pretty outrageous. And I will mention that we are having another drag ball as part of our project, so on March 7th, you can come and ask us for more details about that later. The second tape there is Main Street tapes. It is, in fact, a series of videos that have been made into a compilation, sort of housed under Paul Wong's collection. Materials that were kind of gathered over the years, small vignettes of works, or small works that were not sketches anymore, but sort of realized as a kind of the sort of emerging artist would, their first tape compilation. But really it's about the different members of the group coming together, making works together. A sort of famous piece that you may know that's part of this compilation is 60 Unit Bruise. That piece has subsequently become one that's had a lot of, continue to have a lot of relevance, or it's been picked up again and again. It depicts Ken Fletcher taking 60 units of blood from his arm and injecting it into the back of Paul Wong. It's begun in thinking about it. They've begun thinking about it as a kind of blood brother ritual. Of course, the 60 units of blood result in a kind of colorful bruise that slowly emerges on Paul's back. Subsequent to that tape being made, the AIDS crisis unfolded, and the tape took on a new meaning. Suddenly, being a blood brother carried a whole new kind of connotation. And that piece, coming out of this sort of early experimentation and this early kind of relationship of the Mainstreeters together, it sort of continued on. It sort of made its way into a larger stream. Another piece that's on that bank, the last piece, is the last sort of early work that we feature in the show, is On Becoming a Man, and I believe Paul told me it's never been shown before, actually, wherever he went. It's a piece that involves Paul walking from his house in the morning through Mount Pleasant to Kenneth Fletcher's house. So it in fact crosses over Main Street. It's in effect a kind of movement through the city. It also charts his movement on his 21st birthday. It's called On Becoming a Man. It's sort of about that, well, what is it about, Paul? We'll have to ask you later. But we thought it was an important thing to put in this room. It sort of signals this kind of movement and transition that we felt we were having in the show, from this sort of early documentation to a room full of works that have kind of become cataloged and part of a kind of canon of work for the Mainstreeters.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to turn now to murder research.
Just on Becoming a Man, yeah, a kind of ritual, I would say, like 60 Unit Bruise. I mean, you turn 21, you become a man. That was the age of consent or majority back then. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, murder research. Murder research is a collaboration between Paul Wong and Kenneth Fletcher. It began one morning when Paul and Jeanette, who were living together on Watson Street, Jeanette looked out the window, screamed. Paul went to the window and saw a body, the body of Eugene Pelly, who was murdered and collapsed in the, what is it? You think it's an alley, but it's actually Watson Street. Paul had a camera. He had 36 rolls, 36 images in a roll. He went and he shot what you see, basically, right around the room here. The work is often usually shown in a larger room with the text panels beside it. We decided to put the text panels above, as it's been shown before, but sometimes the images are above. But nonetheless, you get a story, and then you get these texts, which are drawn from Gertrude Stein. They're drawn from police reports. It's where these texts come from. You know, some written by Ken and Paul. It's the way the texts are all brought together to create a sort of super text that operates as a kind of overtonal aspect of the picture reel that goes on underneath. It's a very important work, I think, in our history, and I think it reads very differently now, given that this man that was found dead, Eugene Pelly, was a First Nations man. And we are on unceded Coast Salish land. I can remind you of that. We have a video that was made for the time of the performance of murder research, again with a lot of the work that the Mainstreeters did. It took many forms. It was done once in one form, done in another, like 4 was a performance of the video. And here we have, finally, we have the research for murder research, which Allison and I assembled through the boxes and put together in a vitrine that gives you a sense of the early beginnings of the project to the point of Joe Swan writing in Police Beat in 1986 about the incident without any knowledge really of this project. Unlike the wall array over there, which is non-chronological, this sort of works more in a chronology and does show the processes by which Mainstreeters made art and life, you know, through their work. So Allison, over to you, I guess, for intensity. We're running short of time.
I'll just say a few words about how we came about this presentation of Intensity. Intensity is a piece that was made in response to the death of Ken Fletcher. So the piece itself is figured on the monitor, and it was a 5-channel installation that happened at the Vancouver Art Gallery. 5? So this, the images you see on the wall here document the installation of the piece and the sort of events that were going on around the time of the piece. And you'll see kind of like the room being built. You'll see some of the Mainstreeters are populated. They're making this piece with Paul. And we chose to kind of figure this work in this way as a means of kind of talking through what kind of happened or went on behind an artwork. What's become known as Intensity is really this video. This is a remix that Paul Wong undertook in, I believe this one's from 2008, of really the video that occurred when the performance happened. So the video, you'll see Paul thrashing around. There's music that goes along with it. You can't really see it, or you can't really hear it because we've turned everything down. But it's, you know, basically a punk music going on inside the Vancouver Art Gallery, inside of a padded room box, with a man writhing around and throwing and slam dancing himself into the walls. And these 4 cameras, one on each wall, are capturing him, as well as one from above. And this kind of anguished performance that's going on, you know, the context for it really came out of what was really happening in their daily lives. So we've chosen to kind of represent both the video itself and the sort of life, as it were, that were going on. This array here is a reconstruction in order of a contact sheet taken at the time of the installation. So much with the rest of this room and the ways that we've chosen to sort of figure these works, it has to do with, you know, not just showing these really quite fascinating, important works, but also the sort of like anthropology that's spilling out the edges of it, the sort of like the life, the social life that's spilling out the edges of it. We're going to move or turn our attention around to the other 2 pieces in here. We'll just say a few quick words about them, and also we'll sort of throw you into the room beyond, the hallway beyond, but we won't go there ourselves because it's a bit too small. So following this sort of period of work, we come to a kind of a moment in the sort of the lives of the Mainstreeters. So we're really taking a chronology of about 10 years. So as we get to Intensity, this is happening in 1978, we're really starting to push into a moment when people are no longer creating collaborative sort of experimental works together. We do see that with Slow Scan, which is on the right here. But really, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. That sort of fits into the same kind of chronology as we're speaking of here. But when we get into intensity, we're really seeing a moment when Paul, the artist, is sort of taking on, prime cuts, sorry. Paul, the artist, is sort of taking on the role of director. And we're moving from the documentation of daily life or a personal anguish or responses to the things that are happening within the Mainstreeters' sort of immediate surroundings, to a new imagination of like a kind of glamorous life, a kind of different, a social world, a social being, and also coming into the 80s, a sort of like a televised world that maybe is impacting all the Mainstreeters, but Paul especially, I think, as the director of this work, becomes, you know, really the figure behind the imaginary of what's going on. And so instead of seeing sort of like, you know, punkish parties and grungy glam, we're seeing, you know, really a kind of cleaned up, a squeaky clean West Van version of what life could be. And the Mainstreeters come into this piece, but more as crew members, more as behind-the-scenes orchestrators and set decorators. And so we chose to end this project by looking at this piece as a way of kind of speaking to the end of that moment, and maybe the beginning of a new moment. And also the end of a certain moment, perhaps, in Vancouver's history. Because as much as we put this show together to look at the Mainstreeters, we also sort of wanted to look at the social scene of Vancouver during that 10-year period and think a little bit about the ways in which it had changed. So you'll see it kind of goes from this early hippie era and the sort of, you know, montage of personal photographs on the walls to the distillation of the idea of what it is to live and be social together as a kind of pool party, if you will. Yeah, so I think without, because we're going to let you wander around and see the rest of the show on your own, we won't say too much more. I will say that in the hallway beyond, you'll find Ennui magazine, which documents a kind of social, fashion, art, criticism world magazine. That was another project undertaken by Charlie Ray, Mary Jane Way, and Carol Hackett, 3 members of the Mainstreeters. So you'll see the actual magazines there, as well as representations, reproductions on the wall, as well as support modeling, an earlier work from their kind of the oeuvre, and it really comes out of Paul's work that relates to prime cuts. So with that, we'll leave it. We will be here for questions, and then we'll reconvene in this room at about 2:45 after the tour has departed, and we'll continue to have a conversation about the work. Thanks. I'll start off just by saying that I did feel like 20 minutes, 25 minutes wasn't enough time, because we spent, you know, close to 2 years working on this project, and I think the amount of conversations that we had leading up to this work must have figured in like the